I was really struggling to come up with a clear direction for today's video. I had a bunch of things floating in my mind. Shop Your Stash Summer, Christmas in July, non-traditional Christmas colors, and that's actually for an Instagram hop in a couple of days. And Murderbot. Have you watched that? One of the characters wore a shawl with the prettiest colors, and that's where it all started. Let me show you how it all came together, including the mistakes, the saves, and a couple of cards I'm still not sure I like. I've got Goldenrod, Green Tea, and Eucalyptus from Catherine Fuller, and I've got Dragon Fruit and Wildberry from Concord and Knight. So kind of a play on red, green, and yellow, which is really quite traditional, but my reds are definitely on the pink side. Are you traditional with your color choices for holiday cards, or do you like to branch out? Let me know if you have a non-traditional color combination you think is a must-try. I started by just swiping each color on an A2 size panel. This will give me some perfectly matching colored cardstock for sentiments or shadows, and I added some shimmer by spritzing each one with Golden Hour Solar Spray. And I included a panel of white too. This spray has just the slightest gold color in the shimmer, and it'll add some subtle sparkle to these panels. Then I figured I would just get a few things out and play, and I focused on stencils in my stash that I haven't used in a while or at all, and I started with this layered stencil from Uniko. This one has 3 layers, and since I have 5 colors, my plan is to use the 2 pinks on one layer, the 2 greens on another, and finally the yellow on the third. I guess I could have added sauna so I had a darker yellow, but I just doubled up on some areas to build that darker yellow color. Now I'm not going to spend too much time on each card because most of them are layered stencils and I'm really just playing. I'll just spend a minute on the unique features of each one. And for this one, it's that kind of weird shape. There are 6 pattern squares in the center with 1 above and 1 below. So there's a number of options. 1, you can do it just once, so you've got that kind of oddly shaped grid in the middle of your panel like this. Or you can mask off the top and bottom and then just repeat the 6 squares to fill your panel. Or you can do what I did, which was to turn the stencil so that I could fit it and build around the central pattern. That actually worked really well. I'm sure Bev thought that through when she was designing it. I kept thinking I might end up with 1 square somewhere where I couldn't fit the stencil, but it actually filled in beautifully. As you can see, this is not a Christmas stencil, but do it in these colors and it starts to look pretty festive, doesn't it? And that led me to my next idea, which was to continue using non-Christmas supplies to see if they look Christmassy just by using these colors. I'll show you all the cards at the end, and be sure to stick around because there was a bit of a disaster that I had to fix. But for now, let's just jump to the next stencil. This one is one of my favorites. It's a classic geometric background that looks really dimensional. I started with layer 1 in the pink inks, and I went over the whole thing with the lighter pink ink, and then I went back in with a smaller brush and the darker red, and I just put that on the points of each diamond. The idea was to give it kind of a shiny look with the lighter highlight in the center of each shape. For the yellow, I did a lighter hand for my first layer, and then just a darker hand for the tips. And then I went back to the lighter color all over for the green layer and the darker color on the tips. I love this one. It even looks good if you do it with just 1 color. Next is a newer stencil I haven't used yet, Waffle Flower Patchwork. Remember that quilting release they had a couple of months ago? Again, this one has 3 layers, so to get the darker colors into the design, I used a piece of acetate as a mask, and once the lighter area was done, I masked half of each shape and I blended the darker color in the open area. Again, the yellow worked well on its own by just doubling it up when I got to the masking. This is such a simple technique that just adds a little interest to pretty much any stencil, and it gives you a look that's different than maybe what the designer intended. I went back to the greens, and this time I didn't mask just halves. Sometimes it was a quarter, sometimes it was 3/4, just to add some variation to each shape. Another thing you could do is mask corner to corner and create some triangles in the pattern as well. Next, this one isn't a layering stencil. It's an old, odd stencil from Altenew that you can build stars with. I love these 2 little stars. They really pack so much energy into such a simple shape. You'll see what I mean in a minute. And again, I started with light all over before going back in with a heavier hand on one side to give kind of a blended look. But you could mask it in half like I did with the squares, and that would give you a different look as well. I used the 2 green inks with the smaller stars, and I'm pretty sure that you can see I'm just placing them randomly, mostly around the edges of the panel so that I'll have a bit of white space for a sentiment. I haven't really thought ahead about my sentiments at this point, but I know I'm going to want one. I moved on to the pink with the dot in this stencil, and I kind of put them around the panel. And rather than blending them darker on one side, I got another stencil out. This one's from Simon Hurley, and I masked off a smaller dot to use with the darker pink ink. I feel like I'm getting a pretty kind of bokeh look, almost like these are decorations hanging from the ceiling or something. Ooh, next is a brand new stencil from Catherine Pooler that I was given so that I could help celebrate Catherine's 10th anniversary earlier this week. It's called Dreamy Damask. Or do you say Damask? I don't know. Anyway, again, it's not a Christmas stencil, but it's definitely very easy to use at Christmas. I used the greens on the first layer, putting the darker green close to the bottom of each of the shapes. And then I thought about which layer should have the pinks. I feel like the less yellow the design has, the more Christmassy it'll look. The yellow almost gives more of an autumn look. Well, it turns out that each layer is pretty even in the amount of color, or maybe I got it backwards and layer 2 should have been the pink. Still, it's pretty, and this is another one that would be very pretty all in one color. Okay, now I'm really pushing it. Can this stencil make a Christmas card? It seems like there should be a wreath in there, doesn't it? My plan here was to keep the circles green, and maybe solid would have looked better, but at this point, I just didn't know. So I added some yellow to the centers of the arcs, and I think that gives it a bit of a glow. One thing about this stencil is that each arc can be a little floppy, so you could use some pixie spray if you've got it, or you can just use your hand like I did to hold everything in place, and take your time while you blend the ink through. Okay. I didn't try anything too clever with these layers as far as changing up the intended order and overlap, and I'm not sure where the sentiment's going to go. Time for some berries on the wreaths, though. I went back to the stencils I used earlier for the berries. And now look at that. Add some red, and this thing's starting to look like Christmas, even though it really doesn't. So here are my panels. I actually really like these, and I do think they look Christmassy, even that last one. I spritzed them all with the Golden Hour Solar Spray. The one problem with this spray is how small the bottle is. I'm going to need a new one soon. And then I just couldn't resist. Remember that die I used last week with the dots? I cut kind of a half panel with it. If you want to see how to use the die itself, or any scallop die really, to cut smaller panels, you can watch this video here. And then I used a dot stamp and my inks to fill it in. This is one where I should have stuck to my 5 colors to get a more interesting pattern in the grid, but I succumbed to temptation and I grabbed Sauna to make it 6. That's okay. I can try odd numbers another time. Okay, now let's look at the cards. I finished most of them very, very simply. This one, I just trimmed the grid to a square and added an Ariel sentiment on a wildberry circle mat in the center. I added some tiny gold embellishments that I created myself with some honey gold cardstock and the memory box bubble dots die. For the 3D cubes, I used an Echo Park Christmas tree cut in white with some little gold embellishments as ornaments, and I used a solid joy sentiment from Ink Blot Shop as kind of the trunk of the tree. For the patchwork, I got a 2-for-1. I cut a big waffle flower joy word from the center of the square panel, and I added a white shadow and popped it up over a piece of the eucalyptus panel I created way back at the beginning, after running it through with the Altenew Angled Mosaics embossing folder. This is probably my all-time favorite embossing folder. I love how the light plays in the angles. Then the second card got the rest of the panel. Behind that red and white joy is the hole that I cut the joy word from for the other card. I'm loving how this stencil gives almost a plaid look, which is very traditional for holiday cards. Oh my gosh, you guys, next I had a little disaster. I was all excited to stamp this big swoopy joy on the star card front, but look, it's very old, and I don't know if that's why, but I got ink all over the extra photopolymer around the stamp, and that ended up on my card. I have a matching die with the shadow, but even that wouldn't cover all those spots, so at this point, I figured I would give up on this card, even though I really loved it. And before I put the stamp away, I cut off that excess photopolymer, so I won't have this trouble next time. I still had a little strip of the panel, and I made this card with it, with some chunks of the wildberry panel that I had just scored on my scoreboard, every 1/8 of an inch. I think it almost looks like corduroy, don't you? I used the small version of that swoopy joy as my sentiment with 3 little embellishments underneath. And yes, much later on, I had to go back and make another starry panel, and I just glued the circle on top of the ruined card so it all worked out in the end, and I think this one's probably my favorite from today's session. Next, the Dreamy Damask, and I got 3 from this one. First, I cut a circle from the square panel and I filled it with a layered snowflake. I love how this looks, and often when I make snowflake cards, I don't even bother with the sentiment. Next is a variation on the strip card. I didn't do any scoring this time, and I used a different die-cut sentiment from Waffle flower, this time using vellum as the shadow layer to help it stand out from the background without actually covering it up. And finally, I used half of the circle to add some color to this card. I used a Pretty Pink Posh Mary die, and that Christmas stamp is from the same Ink Blot Shop stamp set. I struggled with whether it should be red or black. What do you think? Did I get it right? I'm still not sure. Okay, here's the challenging one. What do you think? I think it looks Christmassy, but would I want to receive it in the mail? I'm not sure about that. Let me know what your thoughts are on this one. Now for 2 bonus cards. First, this one, which I made with the scraps of all the panels, and I have to say, I really quite like it. There's nothing here that is really Christmassy per se, except the joy, of course, but I think it works, and the colors really tie all those patterns together. And finally, the stamped dots on the die cut. I put them on a red card base along with an old big Waffle flower Mary die. This is a very different look for me with that deep dark card base, but I think it works well. So in the end, all those random ideas, Christmas in July, non-traditional colors, stencils I haven't touched in ages, they actually work together. And what started out as kind of a messy, unplanned experiment turned into a whole stack of cards that feel fresh, festive, and totally me. I hope this gives you permission to play a little bit. Try a color combination that's not traditional. Use that stencil that doesn't scream Christmas and just see where it takes you. You don't need a whole new haul to make something new. Sometimes it's just about looking at what you already have, just a little differently. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.